Hello, I'm Kats, and welcome to today's video. So today's going to be one of those special topic type of videos, and we're going to take a trip down memory lane and do a little bit of a retrospective. It just so happens that recently I passed the threshold of having pulled over 1,000 voids on my account overall, and I've been playing for over 4 years for anyone who doesn't know for the full context of that number. It is not in one session by any means, it is over the course of many years of playing the game. Primarily I wanted to highlight some cool statistics like how many void legendaries I've managed to pull, and who's important, who do I use, and who is permanently in the vault. So if we hop over to the champion collection tab, you can see that I have 25 void legendaries across my account, but that does include some of the freebies as well as some that I've pulled from shards. And then over here on the right, we have the infamous mercy tracker that I use to track my mercy relative to all of the major shards. If you would like a copy of this to use for yourself on your account, the link is in the description box down below. But what a lot of you might not know is that if we scroll down a little bit, I do have a little bit of my nerd corner down here where I have meticulously tracked every single void shard that I've ever pulled, including how many void legendaries I've gotten over the years. And you can see there we have a grand total of just under 1,100 void shards pulled. Now, in fairness, I did cross over the threshold of 1,000 sometime late last year, but I knew that I was within close proximity of mercy, so I wanted to wait until my mercy procced to make this video. And spoiler alert, I did happen to get our latest mercy pull there, Sify the Lost Bride. And so with the rounded out mercy, I felt now was a good time to make this video and take this trip down memory lane. So first things first, let's talk about some of the quantitative statistics. If we add it all up, I have a grand total of 12 void legendaries pulled on my account, and that is once again over the course of 4 years, meaning that I'm averaging about 3 void legendaries per year. I would say that once you're endgame, you should be averaging maybe 2 void legendaries per year, depending on your luck. Of course, it could be closer to 1 if you're unlucky, and it could be closer to 3 like myself if you are relatively lucky. And I would consider myself to be on the luckier side. Again, I would say that the average for the average player, the typical player, would be somewhere between 1.5 and 2 void legendaries per year. Another interesting stat is that effectively all of the pulls make up about half of all void legendaries on my account. Technically, you can add Narcisse to these because he was a pull, but I don't categorize him in this list because he was guaranteed to happen, whereas all of these were just luck and chance that they happened to pop out of the shards. Everybody else from the 25 and technically 26 total champions, because Supreme Elhaine was a previous fusion champion that I did, I just have no use for her on my account, and so she's in the portal of the unsummoned. But nonetheless, the other half is ones that you can get for free and or have been fusions in the past, and I'm including Titan events in that category. While they're not technically free, they are obtainable using in-game resources without having to spend any money. If we take a look at the right-hand side, you can see a couple of values that kind of stick out as the peaks, which are the ones where I had to hit mercy. So over the course of 4 years, I've gone all the way out to 200 plus void shards 4 times, with 200 here, 194 there, 206 and 204. I know 194 is technically not mercy, but at that point I was planning to go all the way out until I got a legendary, and so I'm considering that to be going for a mercy pull, but just happening to get it a little bit early relative to 200 shards. And then by contrast, the shortest stint that I went before getting another legendary was 4, which does imply that these happened on the same 10 pop. So I am one of the few people potentially in the game that has gotten 2 void legendaries in the same 10 pop, and that was a very monumental day, but we'll get to that a little bit later. The quantity is only half of the discussion, so let's talk about the quality of the champions that I happen to have pulled over the years. And this is where the memory lane aspect comes into play, because we're going to talk about each of these champions, how long it took to get them, and some of the context surrounding me getting them. I'll also discuss whether or not the champion is relevant on my account, if I use them at all, and where I make use of their skills. So kicking things off, we have Nekret the Great, who was, believe it or not, my first void legendary on my account after 84 summons without him, and I got him during a random 2x. Now, back in these days, my shard strategy is not what you recognize it to be today. Those of you who know me fairly well, back then I was just kind of more generic average player, just kind of pulling down to 0 whenever I had some voids during a 2x. But at the same time, back then we didn't have a lot of these more modern events. We didn't have pogo events, we didn't have guaranteed events. We only had 10x's and 2x's, and 10x's were generally a bad deal, and that hasn't really changed much, even though they introduced progressive chance events to kind of replace the 10x's of old. And so my strategy has changed over the years, but way back then it was just kind of like the average experience of just kind of pulling shards and hoping you get lucky. And it took a few months, probably many months, maybe even up to a year. I don't exactly remember when this happened, just before I even started content creation. But 84 voids later, first void legendary popped out, Nekret the Great. Still super powerful, still super relevant, relevant. I know he took a little bit of a knock with the advent of Narcisse, but with the resurgence, or surge, I should say, of Marius, he's kind of seen some play back in, just because protecting people is more important than ever against Marius in the meta. So I've always run him in a shield set to expand on his protective capabilities, and I do use him on a regular basis in the arena to protect whoever I want to protect. It could be nukers, it could be supports, depending on the relative levels of HP. 82 Void Summons later, I got myself a duplicate Vlad the Nightborn. This happened to be after his fusion, and so that's why he was a duplicate. And this is before he got a pretty substantial buff a couple of years ago, and he was basically irrelevant after he came out. And so having two of him was definitely very disappointing. This also precedes the existence of the duplicate legendary system. There were no faction guardians, there was no empowerment, so he was literally just sat in the vault next to his copy, not doing anything for a while until the buff kind of brought him back. And now I do use him to auto farm Doom Tower hard waves because of the AoE decrease defense and the block active skills. He's also one of my plug and play champions that I use for wave clearing in any type of content, just because decreased defense, he's a debuffer, but he also does a decent amount of damage, and he has a couple of AoEs in his kit, so he can blast through waves really quickly, especially if they're squishy like the ones pre-boss for Doom Tower bosses. Now the next bit is where I got extremely lucky, I have to admit, and all three of these champions were pulled during the same weekend in about, I think, 40 voids or so. So getting 3 void legendaries in one session was definitely kind of insane, on top of the fact that there was a 10x boosted rates onto Hanorok, as you can see noted there in the table, and so we lucked out multiple times in a row, you could say, getting these. But next up is Hanorok 4 voids later, so Vlad and Hanorok were in the exact same 10 pop, and then a couple of summons later I did happen to get Sir Nicholas as well. Hanorok has been a staple of my account for a very long time, ever since I got her. She was on my initial Bommel clearing team back before Nishak existed, so we didn't have the ally attack method, and so building her with high resistance and high accuracy and comparing her with some decreased accuracy champions, I was able to use her to place decreased attack and block buffs, which is very strong against Bommel, again in a more traditional style team. And then over the years, more and more content has come out where she's proven useful. Of course, she's fairly well known nowadays in the Hydra Clan boss. She's still running today on my Nightmare level team, and I also use her in the Nether Spider and paired with Reliquary Tender, because between the two of them, her passive is supercharged by the fact that Reliquary Tender also provides continuous heals, meaning that she can cleanse 2 debuffs whenever she takes a turn due to her passive. After Hanorok, and once again in the exact same session, 19 voids later, we happen to get Sir Nicholas, who is the first champion who is kind of just relegated to Curse City, not much more. He was in the vault for a very long time. Back then, unkillable teams were certainly a thing, and I could have used him in combination potentially with other champions to build myself an unkillable team, but I had decided a long time ago that I really wanted to run a traditional team and stick with that for Demon Lord Clan boss. So to me, he was basically useless, and he just sat in the vault for a very long time. And then when the Curse City came out, I put some gear on him, and you can see here it's not really good quality, a bunch of 5-star gear and whatnot, not even maxed out stats, and he's built kind of to hit somewhat hard, but just, HP based nuker for HP based rooms in the Curse City. After that, we had a long period of time where we got absolutely nothing from void shards, and I was definitely pulling during 2x's and whatnot alike. I started to shift my shard strategy to more what it is today, and so I stopped pulling all of my voids all the way down to 0 every 2x. Of course, they added things like guaranteed events and stuff like that, so other things for us to consider, which made it more beneficial, in my opinion at least, to start saving up shards and use them strategically more so. And shout out to Eharbad, former raid player. I think he quit sometime last year, but I modeled my strategy after his approach, seeing it for the first time. But nonetheless, 200 void summons later, we pulled Coronar, and this was my first time having to go all the way out to Mercy. This was during a random 2x, and what actually happened during this time period, because I remember it very vividly, is that I was kind of holding off. I was saving voids, waiting near Mercy, waiting for a favorable 10x that just did not come, and I was getting tired of waiting for weeks and probably months at that point, and so I just said screw it. I didn't want to not summon voids for half a year or something like that, and I was just going to pull during a random 2x. I knew I was going to hit Mercy during it just because the amount of points I needed in the champion chase was probably going to be more than the amount that I would pull to get to Mercy, and Coronar popped out, and you could say not the best champion, fair enough, but he did serve some time on my Hydra team, some of the lower level teams. You can see here he's in a provoke set, and basically I was just taking advantage of the fact that on his passive, when he's attacked, he can have a chance to counterattack, and then thus he has a chance to provoke, on top of having a provoke in his kit already. He no longer serves that role, and basically now he's just downgraded to like a Curse City flex champion, so it's the same thing. He can place decreased attack, decreased defense, and provoke, and so he's just a control champion for the Curse City. But he did serve some time and help me progress a little bit in lower levels of Hydra, building out my teams into Nightmare, Brutal, and Hard. Another fun fact is that during that time period, I did start my content creation journey, so shout out to all of you who've been around, the OGs from the beginning, and of course I also acknowledge you more recent and newer folks as well. Appreciate it and hope you're enjoying the content. So after Coronar, 30 shards later, we happen to get Blind Seer, who honestly is just kind of fallen and fallen further and further out of the meta for any content. And you can see, not even used, not even 6-star on my account, so she sees no play. I got her doing a random 2x, and this happened to be during a work trip, so there is no video footage of that one. The corner session is a video on my channel, but for Blind Seer, like I said, I was away for work, and so I had to dig through the Discord archives to see exactly where I posted and try to remind myself of the circumstances. So essentially, Blind Seer was pulled during the subsequent 2x after Coronar, 30 voids in, and I just happened to get her along the way. Unexpected, but definitely kind of a random pull, and unfortunately, she just doesn't really see any play. And I do think she needs a buff to get a more modern touch to her kit, just to kind of bring her back into the meta as a Void Legendary champion. The short-term luck continued with the subsequent pull 19 Void Shards later by getting Riho Bone Spear, and this was actually during the Great Hoof Lorianka fusion, one of these summon rushes, where I believe I was preserving my Mercy in terms of Sacred Shards in case there was a Pogo event to pull and get one, or extra Legendary event, whatever you guys want to call it. I prefer Pogo. But like I said, I was holding off on pulling my Sacred, so I was pulling Voids instead, and as we just saw, I was relatively low in terms of the amount that I'd pulled, and so I wasn't really expecting much, but nonetheless, she just popped out 19 Voids later, Riho Bone Spear, and back then she was kind of falling off a little bit in terms of the meta, but she definitely saw a strong resurgence with the addition of a lot of single target boss encounters, and so she's come into play for a lot of Sand Devil teams, as well as a lot of Phantom Shogun teams. Back when I was farming lower levels of Sand Devil, I definitely used her, but she's since been phased out for the team that I run now, but I do actively use her whenever I do run the Phantom Shogun's Grove. I do have her in a protection set, which is kind of random, but I was taking her for a spin against Chimera just to see how she would fare, but I ended up kind of selling more towards Lydia just because of the different trials that Lydia can do compared to her. After that, fairly lucky, once again, 32 voids later during a random 2x, I pulled myself Angar, and he was useless for a very, very long time, but once again, the Cursed City kind of brought him out of the vault, built him up, 6-starred him, slapped some gear on him, nothing high quality or anything like that, but a little bit of damage, mostly built for control because he does have a lot of provokes. This was note before they recently buffed him, so he's even better in the Cursed City, but even prior to that, just having a little bit of control in HP based rooms was just handy, a little bit of damage as well. So Cursed City is where he's relegated to, so nothing super important on my account. After that, we went on a very long stretch of time once again, 194 voids until we got our next Void Legendary, that being Solus, and this was my first attempt, my first foray into the aspect of using Mercy to pull around progressive chance events. I was going for a Yumiko at the time, and as you can see, we did not get her, but nonetheless, we did walk away hitting Mercy and getting the next Void Legendary, which was Solus, and he has seen a little bit of play. He's in a lethal set, but nothing special, just kind of leftover pieces. I use him in Faction Wars because he's a pretty solid DPS. He's definitely not like the best defensive based nuker anymore like he used to be way back in the day, but he does a decent amount of damage in his own right. And then of course with the AoE provoke, he's also useful in the Cursed City. So Faction Wars, Cursed City. After that, 20 Void Shards later, I got myself Supreme Kale, which is just pure happenstance. This was during the White King Narcy's guaranteed event, so I was already pulling the 110 Void Shards for that, and I just happened to get Supreme Kale along the way. And he kind of suffers from the fact that his kit is definitely made more for progression style, helping you get to more of the late game and the end game, and by this point I was well into the end game, so he didn't really see much play on my account. But once again, Cursed City came out, and I decided to build him up. I have him built in a stun set because he has an AoE on every single ability, and because nothing in his kit requires any accuracy, I built him with a decent amount of resistance, and so he can resist whatever the enemy waves might do, have a chance to play some poisons. He is unbooked, by the way, and then just kind of spam his AoE abilities hoping for a stun to land. If you're doing the math there, you can tell that the next 90 shards didn't yield anything, and thus I guaranteed myself White King Narcy's. But like I said, I'm not categorizing him in this selection of champions because he was guaranteed to happen, and everyone else is just pure happenstance. But nonetheless, we still went on a long stretch of time without getting anything until I got a duplicate Sir Nick. Honestly, I don't know which one of these is which. One of them is the recent Titan event, and the other is the duplicate from the shard pull session. But 206 voids later, we pulled ourselves duplicate Sir Nick, who of course, as you might expect, doesn't really do anything. By now, at least Faction Guardians did exist, Empowerment does exist, and so he's actively helping me as a Faction Guardian in terms of boosting stats for the Sacred Order. And this was my second shot using a Mercy summon to try and go for a progressive chance boosted rates, and once again, I went for Yumiko, and once again, you can tell we failed and got the duplicate Sir Nick. And that of course brings us to our final and most recently acquired Void Legendary, that being Siphi, the Lost Bride. You can check out that summon session if you want to see it. I can link it up in the card up above, but of course I've already spoiled the result if you haven't seen that particular video. This was technically after another fairly long dry spell, so we went 204 voids before we got another Void Legendary, and this was my third attempt trying to hit the boosted rates on a progressive chance event, and we actually hit it this time. So the 15x was of course for Siphi, the Lost Bride. I talked about it in the summoning video for her specifically, but what kind of pushed me to pull for this particular session was because my top 3 Void Legendaries that I wanted, Yumiko still being there, Grezor Iron Gut, as well as Siphi, happened to all be offered basically at the same time during this most recent CVC. Yumiko was on the first day, and then Grezor and Siphi were on the second day. And so in my mind, I'd already been holding off on pulling my Voids for about a couple of months now, waiting for some Mercy opportunity to present itself. And basically having my top 3 in the span of 2 days implied to me that I probably wouldn't see them again in some boosted rates for another 2 to 3 months. And I didn't really feel like waiting that long. Just like again with Coronar, I didn't want to wait forever holding off and not pulling Voids, hoping for something to come around. And so I just risked it for the biscuit and went in and happened to get lucky in this instance. So statistically speaking, I've hit 1 in 3 attempts at a progressive chance Mercy pull. And over the years, the odds of getting a specific Void Legendary from a boosted summoning event has kind of settled around the 20% mark. It obviously decays every time they add a new champion to the pool, and it was decaying over time with the 10x structure. But of course, now that we have the progressive chance events where the base is 15x, that boosted it up a little bit. But since then, we have decayed back to around 18% where it sits today. So you have roughly a 1 in 5 chance to hit it. And so as of right now, I'm 1 in 3 for attempting that and hitting it. And so on average, you would expect that the next 2 attempts are going to be duds as well. But you never know. We'll see what happens. Siphi is a very important champion on my account. She's going to be used in tons of areas. I have her built in a 8-piece protection set. Don't have the 9th piece, but even then, it would have to be this banner, which is a really insane banner. So it's the bar is set very, very high, and I don't know if I can realistically expect to get a 6-star mythical banner with speed that is resistance to complete the 9 piece. But we'll see. Maybe we'll get something of a similar quality. But yeah, I'm going to use her in the arena, of course, live arena, tag team arena, maybe even classic if need be. But I also anticipate that I might try her out in one of those speed teams for the Sand Devil, as well as seeing how she fares against Chimera. So yeah, that brings us to the modern day, fresh off of Mercy and waiting to see what the future holds in terms of getting more Void Legendaries. For anyone who's unfamiliar with my shard strategy at the moment, essentially, I'm more willing to pull my Voids when I'm not near Mercy. That could be trying to preserve Mercy for like my Sacred Shards during a Fusion Summon Rush. Instead of pulling 6, 7 Sacreds or whatever, I would pull 30 Voids or something just to get myself the Fusion Rare or Fusion Fragments. And then of course in the long term, if nothing happens to pop out of those summoning sessions, then as we get closer to Mercy, I'll start backing off on my Void Shard pulls in anticipation of some future progressive chance event where I can then again try to hit Mercy and use the boosted rates to my advantage. All the while ensuring that I do have a reserve of Void Shards in case there are future guaranteed events for desirable champions like White King Narcisse you can see on the screen here. Hopefully this video has provided you with some insight into what it can look like over the long term of having some strategy for shard pulling. Obviously you can be luckier or unluckier than myself, and so the results may vary in terms of quantity as well as quality. I'm not necessarily advocating for anyone to use my exact strategy when it comes to shard pulling, but it does work for me as a free-to-play player and has been fairly successful for me in my situation in particular. The only thing I generally recommend for most people is that you pull your shards with a purpose in mind. The purpose could be just to YOLO. That's a purpose. That's a valid purpose if that's your goal, or it could be to be more strategic and make sure that you're getting something in terms of some event, some tournament, or some guaranteed champion. It is a game at the end of the day, so make sure you're playing it in a way that you enjoy. As always, if you did enjoy this video, then be sure to hit that like button down below. It really does help out the channel. And also, if you are enjoying the content overall on the channel, then feel free to hit that subscribe button down below as well. Thanks for watching and have a good one.